about mitigating and tackling the economic effects of the war, and the debate is more about energy sovereignty and the necessary acceleration of the ecological transformation. But this will require public investment to an even greater extent than before. Thus, the question of whether the current EU fiscal rules still provides the appropriate framework for this task has lost none of the relevance and urgency. So we are very pleased that the roundtable has come about today, and I hope we will have an interesting and forward-looking debate for all of us today. So I thank you, and I will hand over to my colleagues from the OFCE, our hosts today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. A few words to say that actually we are more than happy at OFCE to be part of this event and to help to organize it. We are very happy to welcome you here for those in the room and online for the couple of others. Many people are online actually today. I think that, as you said, this format is very important, I think, for thinking, elaborating, and proposing some evolution at a European level. This idea to bring people from various countries, various institutions, with the same global view about improving Europe in the good direction with all these issues that you mentioned, health, green transition, reducing divergences or improving welfare globally for the people in Europe, and now this issue of war that all of us face. This has very important economic implications that have to be dealt to allow for political choice at the European level. And my experience is that those formats, small formats that people, listening to each other, thinking together from different point of views, different economic situation, because Europe is very, very diverse in terms of economic situation, debt, unemployment, growth, will create a common interest at the European level. And my understanding of the key innovation is that in Europe, we can speak about debt, about evolution of fiscal rules. Often it comes from those ideas created in those circles, and then they are elaborated, legally, implication. And good ideas can help to improve Europe. So I stop here. I very look forward for this discussion, and I think that we need more of them at the European level. So thank you all of us and all of you to be here today, and let's start.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming to Paris. So as Thomas said, the COVID has made it very difficult to predict where the European fiscal policy is heading. And I guess the war in Ukraine makes it all the more difficult. As you know, the European Commission is likely to offer guidance about the Stability Pact in a couple of weeks. So it might provide us with some clues about what the Stability and Growth Pact might become in the future. The Commission will present a final proposal in June and hope to reach an endorsement by late June, I think. But there is a strong chance that it might extend the relaxation rule by another year. So before we get anything concrete in Brussels, I would like you to detail your position and tell us what you would do to guarantee a fiscal path that is both credible and realistic. So you all will have 10 to 15 minutes to present your sides. So it's 10 minutes for Italy, 10 minutes for Spain, for any country, whatever the number of guests per country. And then we will open the floor to questions. So before I give you the mic, maybe I should say a few words about you. Achim Truger, you are a professor specializing in public finances at the University of Duisburg. And you are also a member of the German Council of Economic Experts. And you have just released a new forecast for the German economy that are pretty gloomy, I think. Daniel Fuentes, you are leading the research unit at Creel, Spain. And before that, you were an economic advisor to the president of the government of Spain for the last 3 years. And you also work at the Banque de France for 3 years. And you also found time to translate Thomas Piketty's books in Spanish. So Andrea Boitani is on her way. She's a professor of economics at the University of Milan. His. Oh, sorry. Yes.
It's an Italian. Andrea
If
is
I
a-
had
is a
her.
male. It's a male
I'm
name.
sorry. Okay. And he has occupied several public positions for the last 30 years, and with a high interest in transportation, I think. And you, Roberto, you are a professor in economics at the University of Trento, and you're also a member of the board of experts for the monetary dialogues at the European Parliament. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
Right, thank you.
So Jérôme Creel has been tested positive for COVID, but I think he's right on the screen. Hello, Jérôme. So you're still participating in the debate. You are a great expert in fiscal policy. You are a professor of economics at OFCE Europe, and you're also the director of the research department of the OFCE. Xavier Ragot, you are the president of the OFCE. You're also a member of the Conseil d'analyse économique. And previously, you had been a chief economist at the Ministry of Economics, and also senior economist at the Banque de France. And Xavier, the other Xavier Timbeau, you are the director of the OFCE. You are an expert in unemployment, inflation, and many other things. And you also teach at Sciences Po Paris and Supélec. Okay, so Daniel, you have the privilege to start this conversation. Please tell us what, in your opinion, would be the best way to reform fiscal rules in Europe.
Since I'm sure that we are going to reflect on and to talk about on current situation and for coming years, and I would like to make a reflection on the very recent past, in order to know why we are here at this moment. No? Public deficit debtors, right? Oh, sorry. Micro wasn't on. So I was saying that before reflecting on future and current events and what is going on, I would like to make a little reflection about recent past, in order to know why we are here. No, and I was saying that if we check or we revise big figures for 15 years ago, so before the international financial crisis of 2008, the situations of European public finance were quite different. I mean, more except in Italy because of very singular reasons, but for the whole Eurozone, public debt was more or less over 60%, and public deficit was, positive or negative depending on any country, but more or less towards zero, less 0.5 or plus 0.5. And then something happens, and it happened different things, explaining why we passed from, let's say, a GDP ratio in average of 60% of GDP to 100% rate of GDP. And those reasons explaining why we are at the current situation, in my view, are not directly related with, let's say, public choices. I mean, it was more the consequences of events that the results or good or bad policy decisions that, of course, in some countries, in mine, of course, we didn't make at any time the good or the right or the most accurate decisions. That is okay. But we had a bubble, a global financial bubble. We have, in 2008, a very critical, at least in Spain, role played by the automatic stabilizers. So the revenues shutdowns and expenses explosives, and then we have a political choice of, let's say, we face it a trade-off between preventing and snowball effects in the dynamics of the public debt on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have the need of pushing up growth. I mean, of incentive growth. No, and the choice between these two options maybe wasn't the most accurate one. And we had also for the particular case of 2008, very weak and slow reactions from the part of the EU institutions. Of course, then, when the pandemic arrived, the context was quite different. But first increase on GDP and first even deteriorating public finances was a bubble, not political choices on private finance. Second one was the pandemic, very recent one. And third one, we're facing it. We don't know for the moment what would be the result, but for sure, I mean, it is clear that we are going to face a new increase in public debt ratios because of the need for financing help to Ukraine, public investment in energy, public investment in defense, and maybe, I don't know, but depending on the inflation scenarios. But I mean, so why I'm saying that? Because for many years we were reflecting, at least I don't know if only the economists, but economists and policymakers, we were reflecting on the issue as if the public decisions on let's say the budgetary decisions were the key explaining why we are in that situation. And I'm not sure. I think there were something right decisions, of course, something not accurate or not good decisions, but the very reason explaining why we have this problem comes not from the area of budget decisions. And in the same way, the key rule among which we have built a structure of rules were based on the idea of the economic cycles and the potential growth, and then the structural deficit, and then we built all. And in the end, you think that the 3 episodes of increase in budget were related to economic cycles? I'm not sure. I don't think so. So in my view, it's for that I think the way the current budgetary and fiscal rules are built doesn't correspond to what happened in the last 15 years. I don't say. I mean, of course, the very concept of let's say structural deficit and potential growth, it is still valid, but I'm not sure that this should be the key point over which we must build the new rules. Second point. So economic cycles and policymakers' decisions are not behind what we are facing. Second idea, I'm not sure that uniform rules for every country should be the right path to follow in the future. We all know that public debt ratios, I take the case of Italy, but I could take the case of Spain or France or Germany, are quite different for different reasons. And even the choices, the political choices behind budgetary decisions in any country responds to political choices, so to people wanting or deciding a kind of policies. So in my view, it could be better to focus on a country-specific approach than on a general one, as we have done in the last year. Some particular recommendations I would like in that context. maybe to focus more on an operational expenditure rule linked to growth in order to balance that trade-off of what I was talking right. No, I mean the trade-off between the need for growth and the need for sustainability. So if we decide to be, let's say, more on the side of the growth, then we can expect a deterioration on public finances in the medium term. And if we focus too much in the criteria based in the potential growth and structural deficit, as if behind the results of the financial variables were explained from economic cycle reasons. So, I mean, we have to make the choice between that trade-off, and I think the better way to resolve that balance, it is not a very concrete and particular rules on public deficit depending on the moment of the economic cycle, but a more specific operational expenditure rule in a country-by-country specific approach, linked to a debt anchor. Long-term debt anchor, in my view, should remain in the horizon in the same way. Maybe not the same one, or at least we could consider two steps. A medium-term debt anchor specific for each country, and then a long-run reference that could be more or less the same, I don't know, 60, 80, 100% of GDP, it depends, but maybe two steps. One medium-term debt anchor for any specific country, and then a common long-term debt anchor, uniform shade from the whole. And it could be also interesting in the context to enforce or reinforce the role of fiscal independent institutions in order to coordinate outside the political sphere. No, I mean, so a kind of European financial macro supervisor, not depending on the very particular governments or the ECB or the European Commission. So, as they exist, but a kind of or a better or reinforcements of the coordination of that institutions. And finally, remark. And now I'm thinking in the very particular case of Spain. When we estimate and when we calculate the structural deficit for Spain, we can discuss about the model, about what is behind the potential growth, and we know there is a dark box on what is the NAIRU in every country, another dark box on what is the total factor productivity, and even more the potential total factor productivity. So it's quite complex, but for me it's quite evident. We know in Spain, and I think it should be the same or a very similar case in the other countries. We know that the structural deficit in Spain comes from social security, and the rest is more or less okay. So why we need a macro approach to estimate the structural deficit if we can identify it from national accounting? And I mean, we build a very complex model to say, oh, I know that your structural deficit is 4 points of GDP, but I don't know where is it. I just know that for the whole Spanish economy, your structural deficit is 4 points. And if I forget that approach and I focus on national accounting, national accountability, I would say the same result, but with the advantage that I'm looking at it, I know that where is it. So it is easier for the policy maker to focus on the problem and to solve. What we can do with structural deficit coming from a macro model if we are not able to identify where is the problem. So why don't to use let's say a national accounting approach to measure structural deficit? It is a question. For me, in the case of Spain, it is more or less clear. I mean, a national accounting approach would be more useful than the usual and the current potential growth approach. So, in summary, the reasons behind the increase in GDP in gross debt ratios doesn't come in generally mainly from political decision or mistakes or something like that, or moral hazard, but they comes from events and not from the economic cycle. For me, that is a very important point. Second, it is important to follow a country-specific approach, to respect a debt anchor country by country. I would prefer to forget or to take in a second level the potential growth and structural deficit approach as we know now, and to use better an operational expenditure rule linked to growth in order to resolve that trade-off between growth and sustainability. And that's my point for starting the discussion.
Thank you, Daniel, for sharing your sights. So Andrea Boitani has just arrived. Welcome to Paris. Do you think you need a couple of minutes to grab your lunch, or we can give the floor to Achim? Yeah, maybe that's better, right? Okay. So Achim, you might not share everything that was said, so could you tell us what is the best way to reform fiscal rules in Europe?
Yes, thank you very much, Lucie. Thanks for inviting me. Well, as you mentioned that I'm a member of the German Council of Economic Experts, I should say that I'm not representing the views of the German government, because we're an independent advisory board. And I should also say that I'm presenting my personal views and not necessarily the views of the council, because we are rather split in recent times. Yeah. So, I don't think there's much to contradict, but maybe I just would like to comment on 2 or 3 things. The first is just give you a list of of some of the flaws and problems of the existing rules. And I think this learning process, that it's not the rules and the political will to stick to the rules, but that it's events that do the damage. I think that's a learning process, and it unfortunately it was a pathological learning process. But by now, I think many people in Europe recognize that this is the case. So I'm giving you some of the an idea of all of the people that by now share some common understanding of the problem, which is, I think, important. And then I'll try to say something about the political perspectives for reform, and I'll try to give you maybe some insights into the German debate, because Germany used to be a crucial player, and also it used to prevent major reforms of the rules in the past. Okay, so maybe just some of the flaws of the existing rules. I mean, we know they are arbitrary numerical targets. They are one size fits all. There is no justification for this 60%, 3%, and 0.5%. We know this. We know and have seen it in many countries, particularly in Italy and in Spain, that there's insufficient protection of public investment in those rules, because you saw major breakdown of public investment. And there is insufficient cyclical leeway. And I think you already alluded, Daniel, to the problem of cyclical adjustment that is inherent in the rules. We know all this. It's extremely complex. I mean, take a look at the vademecum, this 100-pager, which gives you the details of complying with the rules. It's not transparent, and this, of course, then hinders effective monitoring of compliance. And then it's technocratic. The rules are technocratic, and they lack welfare orientation and, in my view, also democratic procedures. I wouldn't propose more fiscal councils or that somehow circumvent the democratic process. I would like to see fiscal policy back in the parliament and in democratic structures. So, but as I said, that's my personal view. Well, some recent additional arguments or some elements of that learning process that I was mentioning. I think that I mean, after that's actually the pathological learning process. After and during the Euro crisis, the so-called Euro crisis, we had the multiply debate, which was initiated by Olivier Blanchard, and so I think the consciousness of the importance and effectiveness of fiscal policy has increased tremendously in the recent past. Well, we know that monetary policy is at the lower bound, and that monetary policy can't do much to support the economy, so that strengthens the role of fiscal policy. We also see an increased need for public investment because of the ecological transition, for example. Also sometimes in my country, the neglect of public investment, of public infrastructure investment. So that's pretty sure. And then after the corona crisis, the COVID-19 shock, it's I think clear for everybody that it's impossible to literally stick to the current rules, particularly the 1/20th debt rule will not work. And I mean, it basically, if you want to have a 0-1 decision, then either you try to strictly enforce the rule, but this would then mean a return to austerity and would be infeasible, would actually be the end of the euro. Or you would have to bend the rules even more than before, which might then undermine credibility. So this is the choice. And I think that this is now pretty clear that this is the situation we are in. So this is just briefly my analytical overview and what I think about what are the problems. And now I turn to the opportunities or political perspectives. I think I can't remember a time when the opportunities were as big as right now, which doesn't mean that we come to a solution, but I think the opportunities are big because this common experience of the COVID-19 shock and the experience of common vulnerability that has changed many minds. I mean, this shock of being dependent. I mean, theoretically, we knew we were dependent, but when in northern Italy the tragedy happened, then the German industry, the automobile industry, couldn't produce because simply the parts couldn't come from northern Italy, and that was a very vivid experience of interconnectedness, of how important that is. The same, I think, applies to the challenge of ecological transformation. And we'll have to see what happens with this horrible war in Ukraine, because my feeling is that this will also remind some people, in particular maybe in some of the northern or middle European countries, that there is common vulnerability and that we are maybe, or some of us are in the same boat. And then something that I already mentioned, there's broad support by many European economists. I guess some of them are in this room. There are many think tanks. There is the European Parliament, the European Economic and Social Committee, the European Commission, or at least individual commissioners. The European Fiscal Board has been as progressive as never before. The IMF, the ECB, all of those institutions have called for reforms of the rules, and it's not about making the rules stricter. So that's I think a new situation. Even the German Council of Economic Experts is now split into two parts, where one half, to which I belong, so actually only two people, and the other two against it, but now call for reforms of the fiscal rules. And many countries have called for such reforms, and I think the resistance in the north is not too strong. If you look into the German coalition agreement, then it doesn't say there must never be any reform. It says the rules should be developed further, which may practically mean anything. So, but at least it doesn't rule out anything, which is remarkable if you look at the background of some of the parties in that coalition. Okay, so that's, I think, the good news. And also what's interesting is that some extremely hawkish institutions in Germany, for example, the Bundesbank and also the German Fiscal Board, they no longer say you must stick to the rules, everything must be stricter. But by now they say, no, we don't need a reform, because the rules are so flexible, and we have to apply them even more flexibly, because we can't just stick to them. So that's, I think, also a new situation. I have a quote by the Bundesbank, where they say that compliance with the debt criterion requires that the part blah blah blah, and then they say that, but in the past, nobody really cared, and so this is more or less the proposal. Let's just forget about the rule in practice. And so that means that because they don't want an open reform, they just say, then we just continue not applying properly the rules. And I think one thing is that at least we have to remind them that when now they call for stricter enforcement also, because that's obviously incompatible. Okay, that's, I think, a good development. And so where does it lead us? I think, I mean, the minimum political outcome, which will be progress, given the comparison with what happened before, then we'll see a more generous interpretation of the existing rules. Okay, that's further muddling through, but it's better than what we had before. You may call this bending. And I think if you take a look at the EU Commission fiscal policy guidance for 2022, then basically you already see this in action, where they there's some. It's more or less golden rule public finance and take the leeway you need. So that's obviously where we are right now. And the question is, could there be a real reform? And I think that by now in the German debate, my impression is that it's not about reforming the rules or not reforming them. It's about taking a tactical position so that in case we get a reform, the reform will incorporate the elements that the differing parties like. And so that's why the conservative people, the hawkish people, say, no, we don't need any reform. Let's stick to the rules. And their idea is then we have to make it stricter and more binding. And in exchange for the stricter rules, then you can get more leeway and maybe different adjustment paths for different countries. So that's the one. And the other position is it's impossible to stick to the rules. The rules are that they don't work. So we need a reform. And then in exchange, maybe you will have to offer something to make them stricter, because that's but it's not, either or. It's a bit more constructive, I think. So what I think, that's basically the proposal by the European Fiscal Board. Well, something like country-specific, maybe intermediate targets for at least for the debt level, speed of adjustment. I think that should be achievable, which would of course be a progress, particularly for Italy. Investment orientation. It's contested sometimes, but that maybe correcting the deficit targets for net investment or including some investment or more investment orientation in the expenditure rules, that's also something that is included in almost every proposal. Then the potential outputs problem is addressed. Also, some ideas about making the recovery and resilience facility permanent or have new facilities for new purposes. That's also something that's being discussed. And I think, well, depending on the situation, that's something that we might actually see in the recent past. But it's difficult, and some risks that I see, and I hope that they won't happen. But I mean, we might see a backlash in terms of national prejudices. The idea that Italy and Spain didn't manage to consolidate because they just didn't try, which is ridiculous. It's as ridiculous as saying that Germany had, well, sound public finances because it was so prudent. I mean, that was also endogenous because of the recovery and because of well, relatively high growth and high employment rates. It was easy to consolidate the budget. That's the endogeneity. Okay, so but I hope that we don't forget this, and that we don't continue with this misunderstanding of countries' successes and failures. The problem that I see, and we will have to discuss whether it's really a problem, is that the improvements that I alluded to, which are at least some pragmatic elements, they might have to be bought with concessions. For example, strict expenditure rules, and then these stronger national or European fiscal boards. And I don't think that this is really a good idea. That's not a direction that we should take, because all of our countries had problems with democracy, with radicalization, with democratic processes under pressure. And I don't think that this taking out of crucial decisions out of the democratic decision-making process is really doing anything good for democracy. And so the idea would be, my direction would be, let's have more democratic participation on the European level. Jérôme is, well, he's not in the room, but he made this proposal about fiscal, what was a fiscal dialogue, for example. This could be a starting point. We could implement in the European semester something like that, so that there would really be the need to discuss the welfare effects of fiscal policy in the European political process. I think that's where we should be going. But that's of course a stalemate at the moment. So we need more leeway, as I said, but also in order to convince the hawks, you need concessions, and it's difficult to see where we are getting. But I don't think it's impossible, and it's not impossible in Germany as well. The situation is now changed due to the war in Ukraine. I mean, maybe you're aware that over just one weekend, the Chancellor and the Finance Minister decided to come up with a 100 billion, which is 2.5, 2.8% of GDP, defense extra budgetary item, which is supposed to be financed via debt. And of course, if you do these things, it's more and more difficult to point at people in Europe, and I think that's something that should be included in the debate. Okay, and it's important that we reach some conclusion, because without any conclusion, this whole Euro project is still unstable. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Achim. Oh, you're quite optimistic, but as you said, what you just mentioned doesn't fully represent what the coalition think. So our Italian guests are next. Do you share our insights? What is your take on that? Andrea.
I'm very sorry for the delay. Actually, apparently due to some snow, which was not there. But apparently there was some snow in the morning, early in the morning. But it's now snowing a little bit. Anyway, I like to talk about a presentation that comes from a paper that probably some of you have seen, which has been done under the lead of Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, Rome. And, first of all, this is a reflection on what went wrong and why. And then there are some proposals, which are nothing new, I must say. But I think the spirit is new and is quite akin to the one that Achim said just a few seconds ago. I think that, any reform, and we agree that the reform is needed, any reform, now apparently even the ECB is supporting a reform. In a recent paper, March 2022, post-COVID fiscal rules, a central bank perspective, they suggest reforming the rules, at least to some extent. When reading, it's not really a very deep and encompassing reform, but just a little thing which tells us that even the ECB is no longer on the line of keeping the old rules or even making the old rules more stricter. Well, any reform must account for the changed circumstances. I think, first of all, the demise of the Washington, Frankfurt, Brussels consensus. That's something that has been taken into account. That was the consensus on which the Maastricht Treaty was built, and is no longer there. And then there is another point. Sort of theoretical points, but the weaknesses of monetary policies in tackling alone deep recessions and perhaps even, growing inflation nowadays. There is a very high debt legacy after COVID, and there are extraordinary budget efforts ahead today, and this is already decided upon. And there is new evidence of greater effectiveness of fiscal policy, particularly when economies are in a deep recession. And in a recent paper that has just been published, with my colleagues, we were able to show that government expenditure expansion does not lose effectiveness even in high debt countries. So when the starting point is a very indebted government. So these are important news for sort of discussing how to reform the rules. And of course, everybody knows that the old rules have well-known technical bugs, the procyclicality, whatever the intended contrary effects. What I would say, flexibility, yes, but a sort of discretionary flexibility, which is sometimes, even worse than rigidity. And most of all, there is a lack of consideration of the macroeconomic cross-country spillovers and aggregate effects of country-by-country fiscal policies. I remember that last year, I guess, I can't remember really when, there was a simulation done by a German research center showing that if Germany had gone back to the Schwarz Null very soon, that would have had a negative impact on other European countries, rather large. And the fiscal rules are, have the same problem. Why? Well, suppose you have to reach a 60% debt target. And nowadays, 13 out of 19 members of the EZ are above 60%. So that would imply that with a, to higher or lesser extent, most of the countries, 13 out of 19 countries, would be on a contractionary path. And of course, I mean, that's something which is worrying, okay? What's the aggregate macroeconomic impact of 13 out of 19 countries on a contractionary path? And the main point, I mean, the sort of final point is that the integrity of the Eurozone itself is under threat if the rules are applied or if the rules are not applied, but just overcome in a sort of discretionary way. So what I think is that, what we think actually, is that the new rules should rest on two main pillars. One is that the first pillar, let's call it from horizontal to vertical coordination. So I think that we should go beyond some technical restyling of the fiscal rules, and that the renewed fiscal rules should rest on renewed political economic pillars. The do your homework alone era is over, and it should by now be clear that maintaining fiscal policy entirely at the level of individual member countries, solely constrained by a set of rules which ignore macroeconomic externalities, is no longer possible. And so we should maintain a balanced Eurozone fiscal stance. And in order to do that, and to have the first pillar in place, we should have a large and flexible central budget as a necessary precondition to keep member countries' budgets small and therefore more easily disciplined. And I think that we started with the NGU and the SURE mechanism, and I think that they should become permanent European instruments, and that would make national budgets more manageable and even binding rules more acceptable, at least from the political point of view, as part of the stabilization and social protection which would be granted by the common budget. And, well, here we perfectly agree with Achim that we should resist perpetuating the harmful illusion that a democratic Europe, in a democratic Europe, automatic algorithms may or should replace the so-called political discretion. political discretion is absolutely inevitable, as any contract among sovereign states, 19 or 27, it depends on the Z or the U, is necessarily incomplete. So you cannot have automatic rules. That's simply impossible. And rules should guide policies, but cannot just constrain policies in a straitjacket. And as Achim said, citizens want the government to govern, take decisions in unforeseen circumstances, and be accountable for their decisions. And that's something that, of course, technical councils cannot do. And so I think that rules are useful to create a framework for technical evaluation on the state of public budgets in the various member countries and in the EMU as a whole. But, whenever a technical evaluation, which can be technical, the evaluation, but it has to be translated into a political decision, then responsibility should be assigned to politically accountable institutions. That is, national governments and the European Commission. They have a parliament, either national or the European Parliament, towards which they have to be accountable. So I think the model is neither technocratic nor intergovernmental, but one of sharing or shared sovereignty between national governments and the Commission. So this is the first point. So we don't agree with positions that say, well, let's leave it to technical councils, okay? That's just, the other phase of having automatic rules, pure algorithms. Well, given this, what about the new rules? I think the point is just going from annual budgets, but this is nothing new. I mean, it's now shared, widely shared. From annual budgets to public debt sustainability, which is something different from having a public debt target. Not to say a unique public debt target, that is, once for all. So, debt sustainability, I think that both Blanchard and co-authors in 2021 and Martin and co-authors and Xavier talked about the debt sustainability assessment as a crucial point. And what I worry about is that, for instance, the ECB or even the European Fiscal Board are, quite reluctant to leave this 60% debt to GDP target. I think that's very dangerous. Most of European countries are above 60%. The EZ average is 98%. So, does that mean that all these countries are on an unsustainable path? Clearly not. And probably, according to Blanchard's calculations, not even Italy is on an unsustainable path. So, I mean, which might or might not be true, of course. But I think that it's foolish to think that 13 out of 19 countries are on an unsustainable path because they are above 60%. debt, not deficit, because the two variables are related, and having a target on both is logically inconsistent. And I think that, and Roberto agrees, I guess, at least, that a single debt target should be overcome. And debt sustainability analysis should be framed in a more comprehensive framework. Well, once you have this sort of assessments, then the European Commission and the European Council have to vote whether there must be a sort of convergence path. If a country is unsustainable or the debt of that country is deemed unsustainable, then, of course, there must be a convergence path. And this convergence path must be negotiated with the government of that particular country. It cannot just be imposed on by the council, or of course the commission that cannot impose things like that, and it cannot be imposed by technical boards for the reasons I've already mentioned that Achim has developed very well. So the sort of periodic assessment of debt sustainability has technical problems. It's not easy, but it's not even impossible. Central banks do that all the time. And even fiscal boards can do that. And of course, the assumptions which have to be made are quite complicated, and of course, results are sensible to the assumptions, and we know that. But we can have a sort of stochastic analysis in order to have the most likely outcome of the assessment, and try to build on that. I don't want to get into technical details. But of course, both Martin, Ragot, and Blanchard, on the other hand, have done it very well. So I think that a technical analysis is acceptable because but it does not trigger directly policy prescriptions. From the technical analysis to the policy prescription, there must be a policy accountable body, the government, the parliament, and so on. Well, as for the convergence to a sustainable debt level, the expenditure rule, basically on primary spending controls, with counter-cyclical investment, public investment safeguards. Achim Truger wrote a beautiful paper years ago about the relevance of the golden rule, and I think that that's the way to go. Probably now we have a sort of simplifying route to the golden rule, which is just green investment. So let's take green investment out of the expenditure rule, so that green investment is in a sense protected, safeguarded. Well, of course, there can be other things as well, but in order to avoid sort of maneuvering the figures and sort of opportunistic behavior on the part of governments in order to put in the basket whatever there is around. Well, I think that choosing something is very clear, and it makes things easier. Well, then there is the counter-cyclical expenditures. Well, one should choose which counter-cyclical expenditure should be safeguarded, that is taken out of the expenditure rule. And notice that you can, if you have a common budget which takes care of counter-cyclical expenditures, such as unemployment benefits or things like that, likely sure. Well, if you have that, you may need less exclusions from the expenditure rules on the counter-cyclical side. So the sort of the amount of expenditures you take out of the expenditure rule really depends on how much is how big is the common budget, and how effective is a common budget in dealing with cyclical problems. And so assessment, commitment. Assessment is made by the European Fiscal Board and national fiscal bodies together, but that's just a technical assessment. But then there is a political commitment by the Commission and the governments, and the surveillance, which is once again on the Commission and the peers, that is the European Council. Can this framework work? Well, of course, we don't know. But here there are a few arguments. Why would that it work for fiscally strong countries? Well, first of all, the present system hasn't prevented fiscal indiscipline and debt crisis. Second, a shared sovereignty entails a limit, both preemptive and corrective, to behaviors that threat the stability of the EMU, and actually it allows control among peers. Third, the more fiscal tasks are transferred to the center, that is to the common budget, the less likely are damages from local fiscal indiscipline. That is, the risks of a local, national, let's say, fiscal indiscipline are limited by the presence of a common budget. So it's a risk reducing, even for fiscally strong countries. Why can work for fiscally fragile countries? Well, first of all, the status quo brings high risks and cost of heavy fiscal adjustment disconnected from an accurate debt stability assessment, which means conflicts between polity and technocracy, with casualties on both sides and deleterious effects on the EMU. A repetition of the dark years of austerity on a grand scale. Sovereignty devolution remains with the competencies of political bodies with democratic legitimacy. So it cannot be complained that this sovereignty devolution is outside democracy. The exchange between more responsibilities to the EU and more resources from the EU makes national government budgets less fragile and more controllable. And why should governments comply with their commitments? Violations of fiscal plans may be sanctioned in different ways. First of all, by closing access to EU funds. Again, this makes sense if funds are large enough, of course. I mean, if it's just breadcrumbs is less likely. The natural enforcement mechanism that complements the regulatory system, we have is reputation. And indeed, we believe that the European integration process is supported by citizens. We should also be confident that citizens will give sufficient weight to the reputation of their own government in respecting its commitments, not imposed by technocrats, but freely agreed with European partners and the Commission. And that's all.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It was very concrete. So the French team might have the final word. I'm not sure if you feel closer to Achim, Daniel, or Andrea. Could you please share your thoughts?
So thanks a lot. I will say a few words, and maybe Xavier will add other comments. Good. I think lots of agreement today, and some, but still some almost tactical differences on where to go. And I think the very short run is key indeed. What we should fight for in the coming quarters. Do we open treaty change? Do we change the goal of the rules? Do we change the nature of institution controlling the application of the rule? That's very concrete, and I will make some proposition. But first, we must step back a little bit to have an idea of where we want to go, actually, the global picture, and then to see in what direction in the short run we should try to move on. First, a short view of the history of economic governance. I will make 2 points. We can summarize it as a big rehabilitation of fiscal policy. At the very beginning, it was everything about monetary policy, stabilizing the EU, all the power, independence, and price stability as the sufficient statistics to do everything. Plus competition policy, plus fiscal discipline, it was okay. Now, after the subprime crisis, after the dramatic experience of what we call now austerity, which is a debate about the multiplier, which was almost crazy when we look about it today. The big mistake we made at the European level, which is this tight fiscal consolidation during 2013 and 2015, that ended when Juncker came into power and changed a little bit the spirit of the interpretation of the rule. So we were in this European experience, we realized two things. We say we, collectively, institutions, but first we have no debt encore. There's absolutely no theory, no ideas to have what is a good level of public debt. And the debate has changed after the subprime crisis, that it's not only the level of public debt, but the quality of the debt, what is called the safe asset, that has emerged in the debate. And if you recall, during the subprime crisis, we spoke about Eurobond, Eurobill, things like that. It was kind of hidden in the debate, kind of technically. But the Commission took it seriously, analyzed stuff, and at the crisis, COVID crisis, was able to issue Next Generation EU and the concrete possibility of a big European investment. It was done by the Commission who instructed this thing. So we learned that we must give more room to fiscal policy to stabilize economic cycle. 2 points about it. First, the way it was phrased among the economists, it was the issue of the zero lower bound. At the zero lower bound, there's no monetary policy anymore, so fiscal policy is useful. Yes, but I think it's just one argument among many others. Even outside the zero lower bound, the main tool to stabilize is fiscal policy. And as was said, now we have the issue of, mostly in the US, big inflation. And the debate will emerge that we must use a fiscal policy to reduce inflation if it's too high, by taxing maybe the good people, the rich people, to reduce aggregate demand. But it will emerge. So fiscal policy is back. Second, we need public investment, as we said. And the debate was about COVID, so health, green, no defense. So more public investment. So this is a general view. So how can we do with the current framework which is not suited to this? the current framework, we know what it is. It was the idea that we must limit public debt because of externality on interest rate, that if a country is borrowing too much, interest rate will increase for other countries. And if it's even worse, country could default and we want no bailout. So it was a common pool view of saving that too much borrowing by one country will reduce the borrowing to other country. And this was the initial view. This is totally wrong. Now public debt is very high and the real interest rate are very low. And I can elaborate. We know the debate. It's not only central banking, it's something deeper, that there's almost no relationship between the level of public debt and real interest rate. So we have this framework where there are lots of political economy across countries within this framework. Why? Because some countries are afraid of the necessity of transfer across countries to make some public debt sustainable. I will speak about it with maybe a low probability, maybe it will be Italy, maybe it will be another country, we do not know. But the experience of the North country and what is embedded in Next Generation EU is a transfer. So we made it, it's good, and I'm very impressed by the Next Generation EU. But now the issue of the transfer is in every people's mind. How can we manage transfer across citizens in the EU for the next crisis? So this is the framework. So I try to phrase it kind of in a balanced way between the necessity of some countries to have some fiscal space and some concern of the North that we should factor in to try to think what are the concessions, as Achim said, that we could try to implement. So many proposals have been discussed. As you nicely said, you quoted our proposal with Pisani Martin about the reform. So I think there are we should think about the trade-off. And I will take a stance. The first trade-off is between national fiscal tools and European fiscal tools, the central budget. If there's a central budget, then which is countercyclical, managing aggregate fiscal stance, like SURE, like automatic stabilizer at the European level, whatever we want, we could be more strict at the national level. In my view, this is out of reach. We won't have a fiscal space. So in the coming years, there will be no substitution. Why? Because I think that there will be some specific investment on which we can agree on defense, on health, things like that. So the resources will be devoted to some common public good at the European level, not to stabilization, I think. And for some good reason. We need to invest in some public common good at the European level, that defense, green investment, and health. So I think there will be no political space for creating a countercyclical budget. So that's my view. Maybe I'm wrong, but we have to factor in the political economy of the EU. So I think this first trade-off, I would be in favor of giving some space to national rules, first. Second, we must leverage on economic analysis, the one I have summarized very rapidly. But as there's no economic foundation for public debt encore, let's take it seriously. And let's allow countries to have different paths of public debt according to some threshold, which is debt sustainability. And I will be a little bit more specific rapidly on that. So for that, I think that what Achim said, the least ambitious scenario that we could reach at the European level, saying that we keep the rule globally, but we accept the idea of differentiating the debt target in the medium run. It was also the point of Daniel. And for the very long run, do we keep the 60% or not? To be frank, in my view, it's not key. And in what we said, we kept the 60% for a political reason. It's that if we change the 60%, it's in the treaty, we must change the treaty, and it's very complicated. If we keep the 60%, but we say it's 100 years, and we change the speed of adjustment, we do not need to change the treaty. It's a directive. We can do it. It's more achievable on the political side. But on the economic analysis, are totally in line with the idea that we should not keep the idea of 60%. It has no meaning. It's just trying to factor in the possible danger to put all our political capital into discussing all the aspects of the treaty. Maybe it's what some people want, maybe in the room. I think it can be ambitious, maybe too ambitious with the tension we have in the EU today. So let's try to keep the treaty and to improve it the maximum we can without treaty change. So with that, the question now, if we differentiate the path of fiscal consolidation, what is the logic of that? What is the criteria to differentiate? On what ground can some institution differentiate? I think we should, for some reason that has been mentioned, we should not move to the idea that rules must be changed to implement good policies. I think the goal of rules is not to do good policies. It's to avoid big negative externalities, like default. So rules should give the maximum freedom to countries in democratic space to do whatever they want, even if it's crazy, avoiding this negative externality. So for this reason, and that's a point, I know there's a debate about it, I'm not in favor of the golden rule. I'm not even in favor of introducing some specific investment to remove in the rule. If it's done, it's better as something else. But after we will have lots of problems about, and I can be specific about green investment, about health, about defense, about education, about gender-friendly policies, things like that. The list of investment we would like to be implemented is too long. It's too long. I think it will not fly. And I do not see any institution saying, okay, this investment is good, and this is not so good, and so on. We will give some political power to an institution if, in case it has to make some arbitrage about some type of investment in the rules that will create two things: political tension across countries and too restrictive political freedom across national countries. Because we want, as you said, national countries to be empowered into some policy decision, to take their responsibility and to assume some national political project. So it means that for common public investment, we need other instruments than fiscal rules. We need some discussion with institutions for climate change, for health, for things like that, dedicated institutions with clear mandate, with national debate, with parliament, institutions, elaborating on these issues. But we should separate it from the rules to not to contaminate European political debate. So, for this reason, I think that the maximum flexibility for the debt target, that's the goal I want to reach in the change of the rule. The last thing I want to say, not to be too long, is there's a second point that we do not discuss. For me, it's key, and that's for me that's the key point at the European level now. The debate is occurring. Let me summarize something. A French, we had some meetings in Europe, and the German friends say France has won in Europe. We thought that economic coordination was with rules, and you French won. It's by institution now. Institutions are managing the European coordination, it's not rules. Why? Because there are strong institutions, there's so much flexibility into interpreting the rule, that the institution interpreting the flexibility has a lot of power today. And what is this institution? First, and what institution should have this power, which is a different thing. Today is the European Commission, clearly, which is the most powerful institution. And we see in the debate of using the debt clause for Italy, it has been used once by the institution. So, are we happy with that? Do we want to give all the power to, no, more power to the European Commission or not? the way I understood what you said was a little bit like that. You say that it was national government and European Commission. In my case, I'm not sure that's a good direction. So that's why I'm thinking, what we propose is to create other institutions that would coordinate policy making in Europe outside the European Commission. But for me, that's in what we speak about the rules. The issue is what institution will be in charge of main proposal about economic coordination. So what we have proposed is not, we can have different views about that. It can be the European Parliament, it can be the European Fiscal Board, that is increase the mandate of the European Fiscal Board. What we have proposed is something else, is a mix of national fiscal institutions that would elaborate their main path for debt and deficit of multi-years, what is sustainable, what is not. And based on this national input, there would be a coordination at the European level in the European Fiscal Board. So what we try to think, but it can be improved, is to create another institution in charge of the coordination of fiscal policy at the European level, thinking about the fiscal stance, about sustainability of debt, things like that, linked with the national government and with the Commission, and a space which is kind of where sound economic analysis can be done. Others have proposed a different institution. You know that Blanchard, Leandro Zettelmeier was everything about European Court of Justice. I think it's not a good idea. But what institution should be more in charge of interpreting the rule, and the flexibility of the rule we speak about will be key in the coming years. Last point is about sustainability. I think sustainability, which is now, should become the main tools of analysis of public debt. Let's give all the freedom to countries when debt is sustainable, to summarize it, as a problem. A problem, and I think that all of us, we know that what we call debt sustainability, it's not an economic object, it's a political object. Every debt is sustainable if the state has the power to leverage some taxes to reduce public debt. So all default, and there has been 235 defaults in capitalist history since 100 years, all defaults are political events. When people do not accept to pay taxes to reduce public debt. So it's everything, at the end of the day, about political analysis. So it's difficult. And that's the minor difference with the Blanchard proposal. I think speaking about stochastic debt stability analysis, it's nice, but it might push you to think that it's only a technical thing with stochastic, the good distribution, and it's not the case. We need some political analysis to see if Italy is able to leverage some public debt, if Greece was able to leverage some taxes or not. It was a difficult thing, and it's already in the memorandum. If you read carefully 100 pages of the memorandum, there are some political economy issues in the footnotes. So that's why I think that at the end of the day, even the notion of sustainability should be embedded in some places where there's some political discussion about the fiscal space and the fiscal fatigue, things at the national level. So that's why the European Fiscal Board should be augmented not only by experts, but also by some representative of national government to assess this possibility to absorb or not this high public debt in case interest rate increases. That's it. 3 points. The law target, which is a differentiated public debt, is good enough. Second, think about institution in charge of the power. That it will be key in the end. And third, even sustainability should be embedded into political analysis.
Thank you, Xavier. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. So I have so many questions for all of you, and we just have 30 minutes. I guess there are many questions from the public as well, so just raise your hand and let us know when you want to ask a question. My first question would be for Daniel, if you don't mind. Spain has just reached an inflation of 10%.
9.6.
Yeah, so almost 10%. So it's
psychological.
yeah, you're right.
We're still lower 10%.
So it's the highest level in almost 40 years. So the Spanish government has already approved a huge package of aid and loans. Do you think we should launch a new round of common borrowing to finance this, or do you think we should tap the remaining budget of the NGU?
I mean, in my view, one of the biggest difference between the crisis we are facing right now and the precedent 2 years ago and the pandemic, is that 2 years ago, the type of tools acted in the same time on the consequences and on the causes. So stimulus to the demand was good for the symptoms from the people that they give me a solution in the very short time, and for solution for giving a solution in the of the problem. We are not in that scenario. I mean, it is quite more complicated now. If it were possible to stop an inflation process was by investing more or by an increase in expenses, why not? But I think it's not the real solution now. It is not the same tool. We need a different kind, maybe more structural one, focalized one on energy sectors, and on the side of the demand. We are only, at least in Spain, I think we're only or mainly talking on the supply side. But I think if the situation becomes more negative than it is for the moment, maybe we should act on the demand side by reducing mobility, or as we have done 2 years ago. I mean, there is a price on growth, of course. There could be a price on growth, but if the crisis becomes harder, maybe we should act also on the demand side. But for answering your question, I don't think that the type of solution we use in the present crisis, in the pandemic, what exactly what we need right now. We need to focus more. Of course, if we think in the medium and long term, of course, we're going to need a lot of money to finance green investment and digital investment, and maybe, of course, defense, and of course. But in the very short term, I don't think the solution it is more spending more money just from a macro, transverse, and a horizontal form, but focusing in the sectors. And I mean, the solution it is. Become less dependent from the Russian and in general gas and petrol and.
So what kind of measures could be implemented to reduce mobility, for example?
For reduce mobility, to use public transport more than we are using now, and teleworking. Everything we have done 2 years ago in order to keep people stay at home could be useful to reduce mobility, with a social cost that, I mean, we all know that it was quite difficult to say to the people, wait, you have to change your way of life just to reduce mobility. But then I think we face a structural medium and long-term problem, and in my view, we don't have a very huge package of tools in the short term to focus on structural problem that is more than a medium and long-term problem.
Achim, I have a question for you as well. Considering the war in Ukraine, Germany will have to review all its energy supplies, and as you said, you plan to fund 100 billion euros to boost your defense. So do you think Germany will need European funds to finance these investments? How should it work? Or do you favor a golden rule for defense and energy?
Well, actually, I haven't really thought about connecting this to the European debate, because we have this so-called debt break. and the government has already been finding ways to spend more and have more debt even within that framework. And so I think they already found a way to finance that 100 billion. I don't like this particular solution because, I mean, if you like the golden rule, then it's about public investment, well, usually infrastructure, traditional national accounts public investment. And after the last general revision of the national accounts, military spending or on a weapon system is included. I don't think this is a very good idea. But what actually the government is now doing is it's privileging defense expenditure, investment in defense, by changing the constitution for that, but not privileging any other investment. And that, I think, is the wrong signal. But they will find ways. And I think this will also then backfire in a way when we talk about reforming European institutions. I think if the government now takes those steps, then of course it cannot be too strict when debating what other countries do. And maybe that could then be an input in the reform debate. We would have to talk about the tactics. Maybe if I can just add this, because you asked about the golden rule. Maybe there's some compromise between our views, because there is, of course, this debate. If you say you want to privilege net investment, then the question is, what type of net investment? And maybe people start quarreling about it. But maybe that's, of course, also a political solution. So if you're interested in sustainability, then you just have you set a cap in relation to GDP, the maximum amount that can be spent on investment. And then maybe the commission, or maybe that body that you would, or that institution that you want to create, could then also set the standards for the type of investment, or just say that according to that for this country, this type of investment is rational, and for other countries another. Or maybe you just give the countries the leeway to decide. But obviously it should not be pension payments. So that's not a sensible thing.
Does anyone have a different view on what should be included in the golden rule and what should not? Roberto.
Yeah. No, the point about the golden rule is it's complicated, and for the reasons that both Achim and Xavier advised. So they have to be taken seriously. Although let me make a preliminary point. I think that we as scholars should be realistic, but not to find compromises that are the matter of politicians. They have to find compromises. I think we should be abstain from compromising ourselves to smooth down good proposals because maybe they are not politically feasible. So there is, a knife edge between being unrealistic or assuming too much the perspective of politicians. So we have to make good proposals, realistic proposals, and then politicians will find out the compromises. However, as far as the golden rule is concerned, it's clear that the counter-argument that it could be everything, so people, governments may hide any kind of extravagancy behind the golden rule. It's correct. It's possible. One way is taxonomy. Now is a fashionable word, but taxonomy, as we already seen, actually has not been very successful because taxonomy when it's written by a central institution, then you have lobbyists that go there and say, okay, please include this item into the taxonomy. Another possibility is taking seriously this process of political implementation in the political sphere. Now, the point made, Xavier, are important. Which institution is more legitimate than others? But suppose that we agree on that. When we arrive to the point that there is a technical assessment of the fiscal projection and the debt projection of a country, then within the planning of future fiscal action for, let's say, for the next 5 years, there can be a discussion with technical background, but finally with a political leverage to define what has to be preserved, not from a given ex ante taxonomy, but on a commitment of the government. The government may go there and say, okay, I am ready to keep these items of public expenditure in line with a given profile of debt convergence, but please, we commit ourselves to invest in this and this other sector for these and other structural reasons. I understand that this, for some countries, can sound too many discretion, but again, what is the alternative? I think that controlling discretion with legitimized institutions and through the council, the peers, is the right alternative. I don't like at all, even if I come from a country which is suspect of being indulgent with flexibility. And I understand the position of countries that are fiscally strong. I think that we should try to convince them that the alternative of leave the rules there and let's be flexible is not serious. It damages the institutions, and it doesn't work. I don't know whether I am a representative Italian, but I don't want to stay anymore in a union where rules are strong and then everything happens behind the curtains. I don't understand how people from strong countries like a situation like this. I can't understand. So the idea is, let's be transparent. Fiscal policy is called policy. It's not fiscal theory, it's not fiscal mathematics, it's fiscal policy. So it must be matter of a political planning. I think that, as I can say from this round table, we all agree on this. The point is how to convince policymaker or the public opinion, and that's the serious way to have fiscally responsible governments and institutions, not writing strong rules and then say, okay, but you know, it's flexible.
Just to follow up on that, what are the reforms that have been implemented recently in Italy that should give us hope that Italy or Spain or France are able to be sound and serious?
Well, as Daniel said at the beginning, there are, or also Achim, there are some commonplaces about the past. Italy, Spain, and other countries have had for years positive, what's the name? Primary surpluses for years. And the primary surplus is a sign of a political and fiscal willingness to keep possibly the public accounts in order. That's our figures. It's not just talking about being serious. Of course, there are the costs. If you have a permanent primary fiscal surplus, as a definition, you are taking out of the economy more than what you are putting inside. And it is distortionary by definition. We paid for that. Mistakes come from the 80s. The big mistakes in Italy come from the 80s. And that was the accumulation of debt. We have been paying for that for decades, and that, I think, is a serious manifestation of willingness to try to keep the account in order. Then there have been some reforms, more or less debatable, but the idea of addressing the problem has been there. And we had some periods in which actually that was slowing down. But the real problem in Italy is about the long-term growth. Last year we had this expected and quite extraordinary jump in GDP plus a little bit of inflation, and immediately the debt GDP went down. And that's mathematical. So the problem of Italy is not so much fiscal profligacy, is that we have not been able to come about with the problem of productivity and long-term growth. And this is another debate. What kind of structural reforms we need? If you want my opinion, is that what really doesn't work in Italy is the capital market, not the labor market. We are in a capitalist economy, and I don't know why everyone thinks that the core of a capitalist economy is the labor market. It's the capital market. That's the name.
I'm fully agree.
And the capital market in Italy is not pretty good. And it's difficult to go there because, you know, the political power goes through the capital market.
That's another debate. I think we have questions from the public, right? So, Jérôme, the floor is yours. Pardon. We can. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to support Roberto in what he was just saying. I think, unfortunately, you said I couldn't be there for unfortunate reasons, but therefore I'm a spectator, and I appreciated what I did here. So, very good work you've all been doing. And if I have it well, Achim started saying that there was some kind of an opportunity to change things within the fiscal framework, but they admitted there would be some compromises, and I think Xavier has had a similar line. And this was not the line by Roberto. And I would like to argue on a point which is quite important at this moment, it seems. It is the position by some members of the parliament, those at the Commission for Economic Affairs, and some position, not official maybe yet, but to be officialized by the Commission itself, that to some extent the next generation EU framework should be made permanent. But if it were made permanent, there is a condition for that, which is a very big one. We must change the treaty. For next generation EU has been allowed and has started with because it was temporary and within the treaty so far. But if you make it permanent, you need to change the treaty. So I just want to ask my friends here, if we must change the treaty, why not be bold and change other things that only next generation EU being permanent?
Any reaction? Xavier, would you to take the mic?
Yeah, and to answer also to some remarks by Roberto about the global sustainability of debt, but not only debt, because I think that everything is related there. And so if you want to have something which is sustainable, of course you need that each country has a sustainable debt, but you need also the union to be sustainable. And the threat that the union is going to at some point explode because some countries are not doing correctly or are not are playing a dangerous game with their fiscal policy, putting some externalities on others, or are trying to take advantage and be free riders. There is of course something, but there is also other points which are, for instance, well, you need living democracies in each country, and there I strongly oppose to the idea that we can increase the common budget, because this is totally opposite to having living democracies in each country. So it's bringing out responsibilities and counting on the fact that the European Parliament is going to be a more functional democracy, which is something which has to be proven yet. And it's absolutely not sure that we are going to gain anything by putting more into under the responsibility of the European Parliament. So the question of where we stand in terms of federalism in Europe is very important for the sustainability. Then we need also to address the question of transfers. And the idea up to now is to say that there is no transfers between European member states. And so that the question of redistribution is an internal one, a national one, and only a one, national one. But then it means also that sustainability means that no country is going to be a kind of non-developed region of an overall rich continent. And so for that, we need to address the question, well, you were talking about productivity in Italy, but this is much more general than that. It's a question of the localization of activity in Europe and the fact that you want to have well-functioning economies with no advanced specialization of activities in any member state. So you need to have a kind of general functioning economies in each member state, which is something which is needed for sustainability today and which is quite difficult to accomplish. And for that, you need to be very flexible on the fiscal policy in each country, because you can't rely on the fact that you're going to have a global growth in Europe, which is going to be high. You need to have every country to be able to invest in industry, in research, in education, in order to keep up the pace with the other countries. And then there is also something that no one has mentioned, which is the question of the spread between sovereign rights. And there, in order for that to function, you need really to insist on the sustainability of the union. You can say whatever you want. The fact that Italy is paying a spread on its interest rate is something which should be avoided, or it's true for Spain too. I mean, there is no reason for Germany to have a lower interest rate than other countries. If we say that the union is something which is strong and which is going to stand, then there is no reason to believe that Italy is going to default on its debt one day or the other. And so because of that, it means that there is no reason, no real reason, no profound reason for the spread. And that's going to change a lot of things in Italy or in Spain, because you have a fiscal surplus and you are not reducing your debt because of this sovereign spread. And this is going to be even more important in the future when there's going to be more inflation and when things are going to become a little bit more difficult on that aspect. So there we should also think that we need rules not only in order to guard the countries, which is of course something that we need, and I'm agreeing with you that the ambiguity there is not a good thing for guarding countries, because you can't guard countries with ambiguous rules that you say they are strict, okay, but we don't apply them, so you have no reason to complain. So I think that we need to have clear rules, but those rules are not rules only for countries. There are also rules for the union. One of them being we don't want transfer, so we don't want to have clusters of activity in a country, for instance. That's one rule which we should stick to. Of course, we can put also on the table the idea that we don't want to have excessive surpluses, external surpluses in some countries, because it is a symptom of something which is going on and which is not very sustainable also. And so the rules are to be set on different levels for different responsibilities. But then if we really want to have living democracies in that European Union, we need also to have benefits and not only safeguarding of the union. So that should also be a factor of stability, and that stability should be used for country to develop and to invest and to keep up the pace with the others and to ensure their sustainability in the long term. But and that's the reason I believe that everything is linked, and that we should address all those things with that broad perspective there.
Thank you, Xavier. So I think we just have a couple of minutes left. We have a question from Mr. Rosello. Hello.
Hello. Well, it's not a question, it's just a contribution to the debate.
Sure.
Thank you very much to all of the members of the panel, because it has been very interesting, very much, and so many interesting questions put it on the table. But what I want to say is that apparently this debate is a little bit another road than the one launched by the Commission. we have a paper on the table from the 2nd of March, which the fiscal policy guidance for 20 and 23, in which the project or the vision of the Commission is exposed there. And apparently the idea that the Commission is putting on the table is something like, to say it shortly, an exchange between the permanence or kind of permanence. And we have to be careful there because it is really ambiguous. Apparently they are thinking about the permanence of the next generation in exchange of a major sovereignty for the Commission. I don't have at the beginning or in principle anything against a major power of upper or different chamber of power at a European level, no? As other participants were stating before. The question here is it has to be democratically representative, and the Commission is not. The Commission is not. The Commission is not elected, the Commission is not representative, and to think about the European Commission as a body that has political accountability is a little bit a theoretical point of view, because, for example, who has moved ahead in the Commission after Greece? Somebody has changed there, somebody has lost the job or even change of room. I don't think the Commission is an example of political accountability. However, perhaps the Parliament. But I think that, as I think it was Jérôme who said before me, if we are ready to change things, let's change things in the best way. I am going to say something that is ambitious, but it is the moment to have, again, a debate about a European constitution. Because we are thinking about what fiscal policy we need, and this isn't going to be fixed through rules. For example, the commission of Ursula von der Leyen has been the most ambitious politically speaking commission we have had in years. We started with those marvelous objectives, the European Green Deal, to have a Europe that delivers for the citizens. This is an ambition of being a body of government, and this is a legitimate ambition. But we have to have the democratic back for that. I don't think that a devolution from the state to the Commission without having at the state level is what democracy would back or would excite. No, this kind of movement can be done through a treatment signed in a chamber without the most of the citizens of the country doesn't recognize what is happening there. This is very dangerous, I think. And that will be all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Do we have time for one last question? No? All right. I'm sorry for that. So, yeah, we're running out of time. So thank you all for making the time to be here. And I just had the feeling by hearing you that we might reach a compromise sometime. Thank you all. Enjoy the weekend. And thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.
4 heures plus, là.
No, I took a lot.
Oh là là, c'est strict rules. We have strict rules.
It was really, really interesting. On peut continuer? I want to answer you. I think...
Non, mais on pourrait faire 2 heures de plus, en fait.
I disagree with you. I think you